Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today it is finally time, I guess, for me to share with you my final thoughts on the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Amazon Prime TV show. I have already done a video on the show previously. I mean, I guess you could kind of say I have done two videos already. I did a video after the first character posters came out, but that video wasn't really about me sharing my opinion on the character posters. I was more so talking about the reactions that a lot of people had to the character posters, specifically to the character posters of non-white people. And then the other video I did, I of course uploaded my first impressions video after I watched the first two episodes of the Rings of Power. And so you can watch that video linked down below and up there in case you kind of want to know how my opinions might have changed. But kind of where I left off after that video was like, I'm somewhat bored, especially I was somewhat bored during the first episode, but I can see potential so far. So I watched the last episode yesterday, and since then in my mind I've just been, thinking about and I guess contemplating how I'm supposed to share my thoughts on this TV show. I don't know, for some reason it has never been this hard for me to share my thoughts on something. I'll get to it later on why I think that this time around it's so hard for me to share my thoughts. But before we get into that, let's start with the easy things. I mean, I already did that. I'm kind of repeating myself if you have seen my first impressions video now, but the way I like to start my adaptation reviews, I guess, my thoughts on adaptation, is just telling you first where I'm at with the source material, just so you know what perspective I'm coming from when I'm looking at an adaptation. And with Lord of the Rings, my main connection point definitely are the movies. I absolutely love and adore the movies. They are some of my biggest comfort films. I do love them dearly, so they are mainly what I subconsciously, compared the Rings of Power to. And kind of what the Rings of Power had to live up to, I guess, more so than the books. I did also read the books. I also absolutely loved the books, at least the trilogy. I really enjoyed it. I really like Tolkien's writing. I have also read The Hobbit and The Silmarillion. I can't remember shit from The Silmarillion. And in terms of the lore, because obviously the lore is really what you'd have to know what's being adapted, because obviously the Rings of Power, there's no real direct story that Tolkien has written down that can be adapted. It's just kind of tidbits that we know from other books, from the appendices from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So in terms of lore, I'm not really that well versed. I do know tidbits here and there. I have especially learned a lot more now just because of things I have read on social media since the Rings of Power and even before the Rings of Power has come out. And so when it comes to lore, I'm really not a Tolkien lore purist. There are some things where I'm like, maybe they shouldn't change this lore too much just from a storytelling perspective, but in terms of this has to be like that because Tolkien thought it up like that, I'm like, whatever. Yeah, it's an adaptation. It does not have to be a copy. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the Lord of the Rings. And so let's now talk about the Rings of Power. By the way, this will be a spoiler-free review, so if you just want to watch this just to see if you maybe want to start the Rings of Power, then you're welcome to stay. I just kind of really don't feel like going into detail on the things that, I mostly didn't like and some that I liked. But yeah, what shall we start with? Maybe let's start with why I'm having a kind of hard time sharing my thoughts on the Rings of Power. And the main thing for that is that I personally did not enjoy this series very much. In fact, by the last few episodes, I was mostly watching it because I found it to be really fun to shit on it. But yeah, I didn't really enjoy it. And I mean, I went into it not expecting too much, to be honest, because we didn't really get that much in terms of promotional material to know what we're expecting and so on. So from the beginning, you know, I was kind of in a very neutral position. I wasn't really in a position where I could be massively disappointed if I didn't enjoy the series. Nevertheless, I just really wanted to enjoy this series. I wanted to love this show, if for nothing else than to prove the fucking racists wrong that just, you know, were online and said, yeah, it's gonna be shit because Amazon only cares about wokeness, which, by the way, I absolutely obviously do not agree and do not think that wokeness has anything to do with why this series was as bad as it was for me. Honestly, some of the actors that supposedly probably were only cast for woke reasons were some of the absolute highlights of this show. So yeah, I think, you know, if you've spent some time talking to me or spent some time on my channel knowing what I usually talk about, you will know that I belong far away from, you know, the group of people who only complain about Lord of the Rings because it's what they consider woke or whatever, which, by the way, I don't even think it's that woke. But at the same time, before I start shitting on this show, I still kind of feel the need to, you know, differentiate myself from those people because, yeah, it's just when you have a show like this, it was the same with The Wheel of Time. When you have a show like this and the loudest voices shitting on the show are racist, sexist, queerphobic people, and then you also don't like that same show but for completely different reasons, I don't know, it shouldn't be necessary. But I feel the need to just sit here and say, hey, I may have thought that the show was shit, but please don't put me in a pot with those people. So yeah, I mean, I shouldn't have to, because obviously before the show even came out, I made a whole video shitting on these types of people, but it's the internet, so I don't know. This was a very long disclaimer, so whatever. Can you tell that I do not know where to start talking about the show, that I'm just rambling on? But yeah, maybe let's start at the beginning or at the end, which in terms of episodes, there were some episodes that I did quite enjoy. I especially enjoyed the episodes where we got Durin, Disa and Elrond together. I just really loved their dynamic. I thought even when the writing wasn't that great, which I'll get to that later, but generally speaking, I found a lot of the writing just kind of awkward. I didn't really like it all that much, but the three of them had just such great chemistry together, and they really felt like friends and like they cared a lot about each other. And Disa is one of the actresses where I said Disa was one of the standout characters, and I think in total she was only in 3 or 4 episodes, which made me really sad because yeah, she was great. She was amazing. I mean, there was a hint of something towards the end of her character arc in this story where I'm not too sure yet if I'm gonna like where it goes, but you know, I'm gonna wait for that. It'll be 2 years until we get the next season, so yeah. But in terms of the three of them, I just really enjoyed them, and I usually enjoyed the parts of the episodes when they appeared. But then on the other hand, generally speaking, the longer the show went on, the less I enjoyed the episodes. I especially just couldn't stand episode 6, and then episode 7 was just boring as fuck to me. I didn't like it, didn't enjoy it. The finale as well, I'm obviously not gonna spoil anything from the finale, but it just didn't feel like a last episode to a first season. It just, like, it was okay as an episode within the show. I would say it was one of the better episodes acting-wise especially, but generally speaking, for a finale, I was like, it's whatever. I'm not feeling it. This review is going to be a ramble more than anything, by the way. I'm just gonna be all over the place. But yeah, I just there was just so much about the show where I was just mostly bored. I think a lot of that had to do with the writing, where the pacing was just really weird to me. And I like slow stories. Like, I read political fantasy mostly, for fuck's sake. The Lord of the Rings movies, especially the first movie, isn't that much of a fast-paced movie as well. So I like slow stories. I like a slow build-up if it properly pays off. But I just think within the show, there was just a lot of setup and payoff that didn't really work for me. It was just too slow. The scenes just, a lot of times, just kept going just for a few sentences or a few moments too long. And it just, yeah, it was also the timeline a lot of times wasn't really clear. I wasn't clear, like with The Witcher, when I watched the first season, I was a bit confused for the first few episodes, but I got pretty quickly that we're dealing with different timelines here. Within The Lord of the Rings of Power, I wasn't sure how much time had passed. Are we dealing with different timelines here? There was, especially in the 6th episode, there was a bit of a fuck up as well in terms of, you know, the timing of things, where a person said we're gonna have to have 2 more days of travel, and then they seemingly were at the place where they wanted to travel to at the end of that same day. So in terms of timeline storytelling, there was a lot missing there. Then also in terms of character work, I mean, I already talked about Tisa, Elrond and Durin. I really liked those 3. I hardly liked any of the other characters. With Elrond and Galadriel, I talked about it in my first impressions video, that obviously Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett for me are Elrond and Galadriel in my mind. They sit in there, they take up all the space. So I knew from the very beginning that I would have a hard time warming up to Elrond and Galadriel within the Rings of Power, and that I would have to actively, you know, just separate my image I have of the two from the movies from the image that the show was trying to build for them. Which, to be honest, with Elrond kind of worked. I forgot both actors' names, to be honest, but Elrond's actor just portrayed a really, really charming version of him that I really ended up enjoying. For Galadriel, the character writing, I just really wasn't behind it. Possibly also because the character trope that she fit into, which is just, you know, the hero hellbent on revenge to the point that they can't see anything else, just is one of my least favorite character tropes, because a lot of times that just makes the character really flat. And I think that happened with Galadriel throughout a lot of the episodes, where she was so hell-bent on her quest that all other character traits that she has just completely vanish. And then whenever she was in connection, or whenever she talked to humans, especially in the later few episodes, there were just a few really weird scenes where one time she talks to a character and talks about how, you know, arrogance is not a good thing, and I was just sitting there and I was like, that's the right person talking, right? You are literally the most arrogant character within the entire show. Which, to be fair, hypocritical characters do work when you purposefully write them like that. It didn't feel purposeful with Galadriel. Aside from the trio I already mentioned, pretty much the only character I genuinely cared about was, well, I did enjoy Celebrimbor, gotta be honest, but pretty much the only character I really cared about was Halbrand. And not really a big surprise there. I am a bisexual woman. Give me a man in a fantasy show with greasy ass hair and I'm gonna thirst for him. It's a law of nature. It is what it is. I actually then looked up pictures of the actor out of character and I was like, feeling nothing. This is, you know, it's the Aragorn syndrome. It's the Geralt syndrome. We're familiar with it. So yeah, because of that mainly, I really cared for Halbrand, although I'm not really happy where his character arc went. Not gonna talk about that any further though, because that would be spoilers. Otherwise, for the Harfoots, I just didn't care about them whatsoever. The Numenorans, I was, you know, mixed on. Sometimes I really liked them, sometimes I really liked Elendil, other times I just really didn't care for him. And then also when it comes to the Southlanders, didn't really care for most of that plot. I already talked about it in my first impressions video, but I thought Arandir, mostly just the actor just portrayed him as really wooden, and not in a way where to me it felt like he was just a stoic character, but it just felt like the acting wasn't there for me. So that's it for character writing. In terms of the plot generally, I just thought there were too many plot threads, to be honest. We had like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different plot threads, although arguably 3 of them then kind of merged a little bit into one thread. But for an 8-episode first season, that was just way too much for me, because we just jumped from character to character and plot to plot, and I was like, just give me time please to start caring about the characters. I mean, in Lord of the Rings as well, we first get the Fellowship all together and have the time to care about the Fellowship as they are all together before we then start splitting them up. It's whatever. I just thought there were too many plots, which just made the plots feel very rushed, and which meant that it felt like there wasn't enough time to develop each separate plot. And then aside from that, obviously the main mystery of this first season is who is Sauron. I don't think that's a spoiler to say that. You pretty much get it at the very beginning in the first show, that that's gonna be something that will follow us, you know, any length of time throughout the season. So with the mystery of who Sauron is, I am not exactly sure if it was well done or not. I can just say I didn't like the way it was handled, but I think maybe if you're not very well versed in lore, for example, I think it might be very intriguing the way it was done. But yeah, it just, there were some things and I was like, I kind of would wish that this had gone a different way, because then there would have been other character arc options for some characters. But in terms of writing, it also makes sense why they wrote it how they wrote it, because of who the focus is put on within the series a lot, or which characters the focus is put on. But yeah, I don't want to say anything more than that, because, you know, going into spoiler territory very quickly. So the last 3 things I kind of want to talk about are the music, which is good but not really noticeable. That's the only thing I want to say about that. Then the fighting is so bad. Oh my god. Like, the fighting choreographies sometimes look like fighting choreographies from very old Bond movies, where it's just like really obvious punches, and where it just doesn't make sense why a character would do what they do, and they just sometimes actively are really stupid. I just couldn't with the fighting whatsoever. There was also just some really obvious wire work a lot of times, which obviously a lot of fighting, especially with fantasy movies, has to be done with wire work. But I don't literally want to, like, in my mind, even though it's all being edited out, know where the wire was attached to the person. It just, the fighting was horrible. It was so bad. And then the last thing is the visuals. And like, on a surface level, the visuals were gorgeous, especially when it came to landscapes and surroundings. I really liked the visuals. However, then you come in more closely, and I'm gonna start with the thing that I was the most upset about, also in my first review, first impressions, which is the elves having short hair. And I afterwards at some point saw a TikTok video, and actually it's not the short hair that bothers me. The person in the TikTok video mentioned that they did this really weird thing with the elves where they shaved off this part of the hair. So I don't know if you can see it, but obviously I have baby hairs here, and like, I just generally have hair here, like in front of my ear. With the elves, And they also did that with Gil-galad and Galadriel, who both have long hair. They just shaved off everything below here in terms of the hair. So even the long-haired elves, when they have their hair pulled back, which Gil-galad, for example, mostly has, like he has it kind of slicked back, you just see that they don't have any hair here and it looks weird as fuck. And I don't know who made that decision. And then the other thing with the visuals that just really annoyed me was the armor of the Númenóreans, which we have Elendil's armor and especially his helmet, which looks like a lot of the helmets from Gondor in the Lord of the Rings movies. Not the helmets that the general soldiers have, but like the special soldiers, kind of. I don't know what you call them, but the guards of the White Tree have that type of helmet. So there was a connection made there visually and design-wise to the Lord of the Rings movies, which is why I feel okay now saying what I am saying, which is that the rest of the armor, instead of picking up on elements from Gondor's armor, mostly picked up visual elements from the Rohirrim, which I don't get at all. I mean, technically the Rohirrim and the Númenóreans have like common ancestors, I believe, but the Rohirrim are not direct descendants of the Númenóreans like the people from Gondor are, or are supposed to be. So why not pick up the visual clues from the armors from Gondor instead of the Rohirrim? And it made sense because the Númenóreans we see are cavalry, so they had those like hair horse thingies on their helmets. It made sense in story, but you know, in terms of visually picking up things from the trilogy, which obviously was somewhat the intention, like why would you make the visual connection to the Rohirrim? And then the rest of the armor just also looked like it was scales, which was what some of the armor from the Rohirrim also looked like. It didn't really, you know, it wasn't normal plate armor, normal in quotes. I obviously don't know a lot about armor, I'm just talking about it visually, but you know, it wasn't the type of plate armor that the people from Gondor had, or that Galadriel had, for example, but it just kind of looked like it's a lot of scales. The visuals just weren't there for me a lot of the times. And then the last thing with the visuals, when it came to like one of the groups in the Southlands that we follow, we have the background characters who are always dirty and grimy as fuck. And then you have Bronwyn, who just walks around and has a clean face. Means she also had like a strappy dress, like not really long sleeves or anything, which I don't know, for some reason the surroundings just gave me the image that it's not cold, you know, but also not I'm just gonna wear a summer dress type thing. But yeah, Bronwyn was just had a little bit of dirt dusted on her shoulders, and otherwise she was like completely clean, and it just took me out so badly. But yeah, that's just my general very rambly thoughts on the Lord of the Rings TV show. It just overall did not live up to the potential that I somewhat saw in it still after the second episode. There were some things that I generally really enjoyed. As I said, the golden trio of Elrond, Durin and Disa, I really enjoyed them. Otherwise, I mainly continued watching the series because of my thirst for Halbrand, because that is just who I am. And aside from that, nothing. I'm not even excited to see where it's gonna continue on to. I'm just like so done with it. But the positive thing though is that after I finished watching the Wheel of Time show last year, I was generally somewhat happy with it. I didn't like the last episode, but aside from that, I was like, hey, this is a somewhat good show. But since then, my opinion of it has kind of gone down and gone down and gone down. But now that I've seen the Rings of Power, I'm like, hey, actually the Wheel of Time was a really decent TV show. So yeah, positives, I guess. But yeah, if you have seen the Rings of Power, tell me in the comments down below what were your thoughts on it. Were you a bit more positive than I was, which was a fun thing because Generally speaking, the people that I interact with online or that I follow online are more positive towards the show, while the people I know in real life all pretty much were like, this is a bunch of bullshit. So that was really funny to observe. But yeah, aside from that, if I have now discouraged you from watching the show, also tell me that down below. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out as well, and I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!